The movie opens up in Washington, D.C. in 1993, where Jefferson Reed is woken up by the ringing of his alarm clock and the barking of his dog. Since Jefferson worked as a substitute music teacher at an elementary school nearby, he rushed to leave his apartment on time. On his way down, he notices Mr. Moses, his neighbor, playing a new record while he tries on his new wigs. Jefferson greets him before going outside, and there he comes across Mrs. Walker, who thanks him for getting her tickets to her favorite show. He tells her that he owed it to her for letting him miss his rent several times, which he couldn't afford. Just as he reaches school, the bell rings and he rushes down the hallway to reach his classroom. On his way there, he's interrupted by his friend Michael, who tells him that he's excited for Jefferson's performance later that night. He reaches his classroom where a young boy named Dre misbehaves with him, and he's taken away by his mom, who forces him to apologize to the teacher. When he walks into the headmistress's office, he notices one of his students sitting there with his parents, who's injured from head to toe. Mrs. Law was not happy with his methods of teaching and was about to reprimand him when she's interrupted by the boy's mom. She tells Jefferson that since he had told her son to run away from bullies rather than face them, he is now severely injured. Mrs. Law then tells him to teach his students things from books and also from his life experiences. Jefferson apologizes both to Mrs. Law and the parents before leaving the office. The next day, he is seen walking across the street with his family when he notices a bunch of thugs bullying a teenager. He suggests that they should walk away, but his father refuses to back down and goes up to the thugs. He calls them out for terrorizing their community, and obviously this doesn't sit well with them and they were about to hit him, but then they see a police car driving by. Later that night, Jefferson joins his family at his community center where everyone tries to come up with a solution for the growing number of crimes in the area. He presents the community with an idea of ringing a bell to notify the police whenever they notice a crime taking place. However, everyone was opposed to the idea, telling him that they don't want to put their lives at risk in hopes of reducing crime. Once the community meeting ends, Jefferson exits the community center and heads to his car, excited to finally make it to his show. When he gets closer, he notices that someone has broken his car's window and stolen his radio and bass guitar. Before he can inspect for further damage, he hears a woman screaming in the distance, and he immediately jumps into action and rushes to help the woman. As he gets closer to an alley, he finds two of his students stealing from the woman's purse. He calls them out just as the woman gets up and runs away, and this is when members of the Golden Lord gang appear behind him, and they stare at Jefferson to intimidate him and succeed when he starts running away from them. As the gang begins chasing after him, he jumps into a nearby trash can and hides there, and just then, he hears the gang's leader telling his men to split up and look around for Jefferson. All of a sudden, Dre lifts up the trash can's lid and finds his teacher hiding inside. However, to his relief, Dre doesn't say anything and lets him hide there, and Jefferson finds himself sitting inside the trash can until midnight, which is when he decides to get out and head home. On his way there, he spots a strange green light in the sky, and he quickly discovers that there's a meteor that's heading toward his direction. He begins running, but it seemed as though the meteor was chasing him and eventually catches up with him. The meteor hits him and gets absorbed into his body, causing third-degree burns. Jefferson is taken to the hospital, where he receives treatment for several burns on his body, and all of the doctors were left in awe as his blood samples show anomalies. They, along with several scientists and nurses, rush to his room and remove his bandages to find out that he has no scar tissue. The head doctor thinks that there's been some kind of misdiagnosis due to the lack of scar tissue and begins reprimanding his doctors. When the doctor presents his theory of third-degree burns to everyone's shock, Jefferson tells the doctor that he was wrong and then recites a paragraph from one of their medical book, correcting him on the topic. Soon though, he forgets what he was saying, and that night, Jefferson wakes up to find that he can look through walls when he wakes up to the sound of a nurse talking to her patient. Then, as he opens his room's window, he discovers that he can see what people are wearing underneath their clothes. This really, obviously excites him, and he lies back down on his bed and presses the button called for a nurse that he thought was extremely good looking. However, his luck runs out when an older nurse arrives in his room and insists on helping him. A few days later, Jefferson was released from the hospital and he goes back home. He arrives at his apartment and greets his dog, and then he discovers that he has newfound abilities that allow him to communicate with his dog. This way, he can understand what his dog was saying, and his dog was able to understand what he was saying. Later that day, Jefferson finds his friend Michael, who arrives at his apartment to check up on him. Jefferson immediately tells him about his newfound abilities, and his friend refuses to believe him, but when he starts reciting content from all the books that he can, Michael had no choice but to believe him. This prompts Michael to wonder if anyone else got hit by the same meteor and acquired the same powers. The scene then changes to an old man who'd managed to trap a small portion of the meteor and was using it to control things around him. Meanwhile, Jefferson's father, Mr. Reed, is seen walking down the streets when someone attacks him and pushes him to the ground. It turns out that the thugs he interrupted belonged to the Golden Lord's gang as well. The next morning, Jefferson is called in for a school faculty meeting, and one of the teachers complains during the meeting that the students at their school are out of control and that there's no way to help them. He suggests that they should just get transferred, but Mrs. Law interrupts him and tells him that the children should not get transferred to another school, but rather to Jefferson's class. Hearing his name, he comments that he doesn't mind taking care of more children and stands up to give a speech. In the middle of it, he gets a vision of his students stealing and loses his train of thought. Luckily, he's saved by another teacher who continues where he left off while he goes out to stop his students. That night, Jefferson takes his father home from the hospital in a wheelchair when they're interrupted by several members of the Golden Lord's gang. Before they can touch his father, Jefferson tells them to stay away, but this doesn't sit well with them and they rush forward to attack him, but all of a sudden his powers get activated and he uses his superhuman strength to throw the gangsters back. Scared, the gangsters run off as well, and when Jefferson notices that his whole family has witnessed his powers, he confesses that he acquired superpowers after getting hit by a meteor. Although he had asked his family to keep it a secret, word quickly gets out and he begins to get recognized as a hero. One day, Jefferson wakes up late for work and rushes to get to school. On his way there, a car full of Golden Lord members drives past him, and the men inside draw their guns out and start shooting at Jefferson. The bullets don't harm him, and suddenly, Jefferson starts flying and he latches onto a streetlight as the gangsters drive away. While hanging there, he notices a nearly naked woman and freaks out when she calls him a peeping Tom. Due to his movements, the streetlight breaks apart and he falls to the ground, causing a massive earthquake. Everyone is shocked to hear about the earthquake since it was the first in the history of Washington, D.C. And over the next few days, Jefferson's parents express their excitement over his powers and begin coming up with plans on how they could best utilize his powers. His mom even sews up a costume for him, and just like his parents, his community was excited to brand him as a superhero for driving the gang out of their streets. Meanwhile, Goldilocks and the rest of the gang members report back to their boss and tell him that Jefferson has managed to survive despite being hit by an array of bullets. He refuses to believe that a man could survive after getting shot and then flying, and he thinks all of this is just his men making up excuses for their failure and threatens to get rid of them if they don't kill Jefferson. On the other hand, Jefferson finally decides on a new costume and spends his nights rescuing people in distress and dealing with criminals. He even manages to fix the community's relationship with the police department, and soon after, the Meteor Man becomes famous and everyone begins to wonder what the limit of his abilities are. With his rise in popularity, the criminal syndicate was not happy because the Meteor Man has managed to take down their drug rings and has caused them huge losses. One man named Mr. Bears offers $1 million to anyone who can bring the man to him. Not concerned with the danger that he's putting himself in, Jefferson makes his way to an abandoned parking lot. Overnight, he clears the area out and plants flowers in the area, and the next morning as the town wakes up, they're surprised to find a garden in the middle of their ghetto. One day, while he was busy working, Jefferson gets surrounded by the Golden Lord's gang, and they accuse him of being the Meteor Man. He tries to tell them that it's not him, but they refuse to believe him, and just then, Michael walks into the classroom and makes up a lie, and announces that the Meteor Man has just finished getting rid of more criminals. At night, as Jefferson sleeps, someone sneaks into his room and steals his costume, and when he realizes that his costume is missing, he rushes to find the person responsible because he knows that the men of the Golden Lords have probably surrounded him. Sure enough, as he gets to the location, he notices the fake Meteor Man, who turns out to be Michael, surrounded by gangsters who are preparing their guns to kill him. The fake Meteor Man soon realizes that he's being followed and tries to escape. However, he finds a Golden Lord's member in every corner and finds himself trapped with no way out. With no other choice left, Jefferson uses his powers from a distance and makes the fake Meteor Man fly using his fingers. Unfortunately for him though, he was not as discreet as he wanted, and the Golden Lord's leader manages to figure out who the real Meteor Man is. That evening, when Jefferson returns to the community center, everyone surprises him with a party to celebrate him and his heroic acts. In the middle of the party, they hear a commotion outside and decide to check it out, and as soon as they get outside, Jefferson notices members of the gang waiting for him and they start to shoot him. Jefferson uses his powers to dodge all the bullets and protect the people behind him, but by the time they stop shooting and leave, Jefferson finds his hands are actually bleeding and that he might be losing his powers. The next morning, the criminal syndicate's leader, Mr. Byers, manages to find Jefferson's apartment and reaches there, intending to kill the Meteor Man since the Golden Lords have reported that he's lost his powers. Inside his apartment, Jefferson's dog tries to wake him up, but when he doesn't wake up, his dog drags him away and hides him underneath a pile of dirty clothes. Sometime later, his father Michael arrives at his apartment to wake him up, and they theorize that he sleeps to recharge his powers, which is why he was unable to wake up earlier. When he goes out that day, he discovers that the community no longer sees him as a hero, but rather as a threat. They blame him for risking their safety and ask him to leave so that peace can be restored. Jefferson agrees to honor their wishes and goes back home to pack, but all of a sudden, he hears a loud noise outside and decides to check it out. He finds that the Golden Lord's leader, Simon, is back again, and he wants to take down the Meteor Man once and for all. The two of them begin fighting as everyone watches, and as Jefferson begins to lose his powers once again, a meteor lands near them. Both of the men jump to reach for it and end up touching it at the same time, and both of them then acquire the same powers and continue fighting until their powers begin to end. And at that moment, Jefferson touches a martial arts book and begins using its similar techniques to fight Simon, and he manages to defeat the gang's leader after a long fight, and the movie ends with Jefferson continuing to use his powers to bring positive change in his community, while everyone in the ghetto continues to support him.